Alrighty, class. So imagine you're out on a boat, doing a little bit of fishing, cast right up next to the beach, working it right on back. Next thing you know, boom, smashed by a big bass. Alright, you got a fun fight, poles all bent over, action's crazy, fish jumping out of the water, super freaking fun. Nice light tackle, probably using a spinning rod or a bait caster or something along those lines. Or you could be using, really big rod on the back of a boat again, somewhere out in the Gulf of Mexico, trolling for something big. You got a big, heavy-based rod bottom. You're working with roller tips. Probably a Penn International, something along those lines, and you hook into a big marlin. Next thing you know, same thing, fish jumping out of the water, going crazy. Differences are with saltwater fishing, a lot of times you're chasing a fish that's much, much bigger than freshwater fishing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about some of the differences in poles and equipment that you'll be using for either saltwater or freshwater fishing. All right, so first off, in freshwater fishing, a lot of times you've got three main reels that you would use in freshwater fishing. You'll have a bait caster, a spin casting, and a spinning rod, as well as a fly rod. So I actually have two of those rods here with me that I'll show you guys in just a minute. But for the most part, as a freshwater fisherman, you'll normally be using a bait caster or a spinning rod. A lot of the reels that you would use as like a beginner would be like a spin caster, and it looks something similar to this right here. This is an open face spinning reel, all right? So obviously you have your spool right here, and this is what holds your line. And then this piece right here is called the bail, this wire, and it swivels up like this. And what happens is you hold the line, the bail flips up, all right? What you do now is obviously you flip your line out that way, but to cast, you let go of the line and it comes right off the spool. Well, the difference with a spinning and a spin casting rod is a spinning rod obviously is open face just like this. With a spin casting rod, what it has a safety cone on top, all right? So the cone actually covers the entire piece right here, and then it cones out. What that does is the line sits in here, and you have a button that you press back here. So you'll press your button, and then it releases. That way you can cast, versus putting your finger on the line and casting it that way. Some of the big differences there. Normally with a spin caster, you can't cast as far. Also, you got to use kind of lightweight line. It's for like beginner fishermen, things like that. It doesn't really do very good with saltwater because the cone, whenever you're reeling in the line, the cone will actually hold moisture on the inside of the rod. So you normally want to use those for freshwater only. So that kind of goes over a open-faced reel, also a spin casting reel. With a bait caster, it's not really the same. So what you have is you have your full mechanism, and it's got the spool that it lays sideways like this, and it's in between two bearings. And the line wheels up like this, so your pole's coming this way, the line comes back down this way. A lot of guys like to use those bait casters for saltwater as well as freshwater. For the most part, you'll see it with freshwater. What the guys like to do is, throw big crankbait, stuff like that. And the nice thing about being able to use a bait caster is with a bait caster, you can use kind of heavier line as well. They're a little more accurate. The eyelets on your rod are much smaller. So that way, whenever you cast, it can kind of feather right into wherever you want to do it. And a lot of guys use these for freshwater fishing because obviously you want to have an accurate cast. A lot of times you're casting up into weeds, next to a shoreline, over top of rocks, into tree limbs, stuff like that, where a lot of the fish want to spawn. Also, we'll go ahead and change it up to saltwater now. With that being said, this right here is a fly rod, and well, it's a fly reel. So what these guys are is this is a very specific kind of fishing. With this fishing, normally you'll see it in freshwater, but you know, the kind of hardcore guys, they like to do it in saltwater as well. What these do is it doesn't actually cast a bait. What you do with it is you actually cast the line, and with casting the line, it kind of makes it hard because there's a lot of technique to it. So you actually have a double casting motion as well as a back cast and a forward cast, and then your actual cast when you want to put your bait somewhere is called a shot. And so what you'll do is you have your back cast, your forwards cast, and then you have to get that line looping really good, and it will loop and lay down in the water, and you feather it down so that it's real light, so when it taps the water it doesn't spook the fish. It's really good for bass fishing, catching tilapia, a lot of freshwater fish. I'll just name off a couple of them. So you've got obviously your largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, striper, then you've got knife clownfish, peacock bass, bluegill. You got a couple of different things. You got muskie, you got pike. So those are just like a couple of freshwater fish. Normally freshwater fish are going to be a little bit smaller as well. But yeah, like I said, back to saltwater. So with saltwater, you're normally using like heavier line because obviously there's bigger fish there. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of the inshore fishing, redfish, snapper, well, small snapper, by inshore grouper, sometimes you get Goliath grouper in there, bonefish, tarpon, snook, I mean the list goes on forever. So the nice thing about saltwater fishing is you've got two different types. You've got inshore, which is normally smaller fish unless you're shooting for like tarpon, but even then you use light line. And then you've also got offshore fishing. And the offshore fishing is where you're chasing down things like, you know, billfish, your marlins, your different types of swordfish, sailfish. You're also catching tuna, wahoo, mahi-mahi, things of that nature. So those are all really, really big fish. And with that being said, like I was saying, this is a lightweight inshore rod. So it's for catching, you know, anything from redfish, snook, tarpon, things like that. You do not want to use a pole like this trying to catch a marlin unless the marlin's like this big. So with that being said, what you're going to be using is something much bigger. It'll be probably about that big around at the base. It's going to come up, and instead of eyelets like so, I don't know if you can see this on camera, but these little eyelets, what these do is they've got really smooth plastic or sometimes like a ceramic on the inside here, and what that does is it allows the line to slide through it really well. Well, the big rods don't have that. They have rollers, and what it is it's a bearing so that the line can sit on top of a metal roller so that it can roll off, because you're using really thick line, you know, 100-pound monofilament, things like that. You're also going to be using like a really big bait caster. It's the same thing, but instead of a bait caster being like really small, normally they're kind of small, aerodynamic, you know, makes for swinging your wrist and flipping a bait out there really easy. Well, these guys are huge. You know, they're this big. It looks like it looks like you could reel up your anchor with it. So with that being said, you got this big giant pole, big giant reel, chasing down big giant fish. All right. So like I was saying, it's all about what kind of fish you want to catch. You want to be freshwater, normally going to have exciting, fun, quick fights, probably going to be fishing in a pond, lake, river. Or you can have your really long, drawn out, 2-hour long fights with a fish that's 1,600 pounds. You know, I mean, it could be huge. But Anyhow, you guys have a good one. Appreciate it.